Hi, folks. This is Jason, host of Fighting Words Financial. There was absolutely no plan in my mind to go live today. Let me know if you guys can hear me. Said I don't know if anyone's actually out there listening at this point since I didn't plan this. But anyway, wanted to talk a little bit to you guys today just about the state of the electric vehicle market and some of the things that are going on right now inside the United States and, of course, in China. So right now, I want to let you guys know that I'm doing a very, very American thing, which is I am taking a working vacation here. I know that's kind of, if you live in Europe, a working vacation is something that it's not really talked about. People take actual vacations. But I decided to go see my dad, who I haven't seen in over a year because of COVID, and to take the time to just do some work while I'm there, catch up on a few things, and do a little reset, right? I think we all need a little bit of a reset after last year. If you're out there right now checking this out, let me know if you can hear me in the comment section. And if you guys, just let me know if you guys can hear me in the comment section. If you have any questions whatsoever, go ahead and ask. So I'm using kind of a different setup than before. I'm just doing everything on my laptop here. And this is the first time I've used this microphone and webcam setup. So I have no idea if it actually works. Anyway, a couple of things I wanted to talk about today in this live stream is the kind of the state of the electric vehicle market in China versus the United States. And I want to talk about kind of the differences in how that's all being handled and why I think that China in a lot of ways is kind of kicking our butts here in the West when it comes to electrifying transportation and moving towards green energy production. But if you guys have any questions, let me know. There's a couple of other subjects I wanted to talk about today related to the financial world. One of those is a little bit, it's way off track, has nothing to do with what I normally talk about, which is technology, electric vehicles, and that sort of thing. And it has to do with the new child tax credit that's out there. If you guys don't know about the new child tax credit, if you have children, and I think that there's a difference for the tax credit between children ages 8 to 17 and children under the age of 8. If the children are under the age of 8, the tax credit went from $2,000 up to $3,600. And what's really important about this is you're going to get an advance on that tax credit. And if your children are over 8, then it's still a $3,000 tax credit rather than a $2,000 tax credit. What makes this amazing is that this year, as part of a measure in the stimulus package to stimulate the economy, you're going to get an advance on that increased child tax credit, meaning that even it's called a refundable credit, which really means it's free money, even if you don't owe taxes. But beginning July 15th, if you have children and you filed your 2020 taxes and you're within certain income brackets, meaning if you're single and you make under $75,000 a year, if you're married and you make under $150,000 a year, you're going to get an advance on that tax credit. You're literally going to get checks or electronic deposits in your account. Like in my case, I have children ages 11 and 13. I'm going to get $500 extra a month. So, basically $250 per child. So I'm getting half of that credit up front. If you have children that are under the age of 8, like say 2 of those, you'd be getting $600 a month. So everyone with children is essentially getting more stimulus on top of that. And that's going to happen now between July and the end of the year. I think that's going to have an enormous stimulative effect on the economy here. There are arguments against this, arguments for this. It's already done, though. This is happening. You should start seeing those checks hit your accounts by sometime right after July 15th. Anyway, that's pretty exciting. I think that could cause folks to have a little bit more money in their pockets. That could cause the stock market to take off a little bit. It could be some sort of a stimulative effect, not just for consumerism, but for the market as well. I was really impressed how a lot of young people during 2020 with their stimulus money, they ended up taking that and investing that. And for the most part, I think they had pretty positive experiences. Let's face it, it was hard to lose money in the markets last year. And after the run-up that we had in 2020, everybody thinks that they're a stock genius right now. This year, a few people are going to find out that they're not actually stock geniuses. So Rocketman III has a question. He says, morning, buddy. You think that NIO is going to have an offering? And if so, what do you think it'll dip to? Well, the announcement of an offering for XPEV didn't actually cause a dip in the share price whatsoever. They offered, I think it was about $1.8 billion in shares that went out. Now, when those were finally floated on the Hong Kong exchange, those shares are actually flat for the day, but there was a lot of other news that was coming out regarding China's crackdown on a couple of different technology companies. So look, despite the valuation of NIO being very, very high, meaning that the value of their stock that's available on stock markets is very, very high, and XPEV as well. When you look at the size of their companies, what they're producing right now, and how important they are relative to China's economy as a whole, it's actually pretty small and not that significant. I know that we are so involved in investing in these markets that we think it's so impressive and so large. It really isn't, right? So I think that they're probably not going to catch a ton of interest in terms of regulators for right now. And if you look at it, both of these companies, XPEV and NIO, are doing things pretty much by the book. They not only want to be on the good side of Chinese regulators, they want to be on the good side of American regulators as well. And I think I think that they're not going to be targeted in this round. I think that if they are ever going to be targeted, it's going to be 4 or 5 years from now. But in terms of NIO having a secondary offering, I think that's pretty much a guarantee. It has followed that these folks have had secondary offerings or offerings of different types of securities like convertible bonds, sort of one right after the other, following the blueprint that Tesla laid out before them. Tesla's build out in a lot of ways was based on faith, was based on almost religious-like fervor when it comes to the electric future, right? And this future of electrified transportation. They really relied on that cult investing in Tesla over and over and over. Let's face it, I don't know how early you guys were investors in Tesla, but I made my first investment in them in 2011. And I can tell you that that investment wasn't made with the soundest of reasoning from a financial planner's perspective. It really wasn't. I invested in it because I liked the idea of electric cars in a future where we weren't pouring out carbon emissions into the atmosphere all the time, where you didn't own something where you were beholden. Because I'm an early adopter of solar power as well. My whole idea was to eventually own a car and never pay for transportation costs in terms of fuel ever again. And that was really kind of my motivation behind that investing. It wasn't done for solid investing reasons. In fact, there were many reasons in 2011 to think that Tesla wouldn't make it. As late as like 2008, Elon Musk kind of looked a little crazy, right? There were 3 launches in a row from SpaceX that had failed. SpaceX had to be rescued by Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel also made a huge investment in Tesla, I think right around that same time frame as well. So the fact that everyone thought that they would be successful really didn't exist then. And so Elon Musk relied on going back to the markets time and time again. In fact, he did a secondary offering in the same year that they went public. He did another big one in like 2012. And they did convertible bonds where they sell bonds that could be converted into stocks at a specific strike price. They use those a lot of times to raise money as well. NIO and XPEV are simply following that same path, but at an accelerated timetable just because they can at this point. Everyone's familiar. All the big investment houses are actually familiar with this at this point. So, so NIO and XPEV are also going to rely on that sort of cult-like aspect, and Li to a degree as well. Have you been watching Li Auto? This is out of the big 3, this is one of the ones that's really not sort of attracting a lot of attention. But they sold 7,000 plus Li 1 models last month, and I think that's very, very impressive. My share, I didn't own very many shares in Li. I sold some a while back. I sell a lot of covered calls just to generate extra income on my portfolio. And recently my Li shares got called away again. So now I only have like 50 left. But I'm looking to re-enter that stock if it goes back below a certain price. I haven't determined what that is yet. So I'm going to move on to a couple of questions here. Chris Palmer says, are there negative impacts on the U.S. exchange with China taking on more interest on listing in the Hong Kong exchange, is that in itself a form of dilution, listing on dual exchanges? It really, as a form of dilution, it really depends on how you characterize that. I'm going to say yes, it is. Absolutely, it is. You created $1.8 billion of shares. You dropped them on another exchange. That's essentially equal to, or roughly equal to the IPO that you had in the United States. Is this a negative? I think it's a negative for the United States that now, and maybe a negative for our relationship as well, that now the relationship, between the United States and China, now that the relationships between Chinese companies and U.S. markets who are willing to fund these companies and Chinese companies who need this money, it makes us to where our economies are not quite as linked as we were before. Some people will see that as a good thing. I see that as a bad thing. Economies or countries who have economies that are linked don't tend to have serious conflict. So there's an old saying in diplomatic circles, I don't know who said this originally, but essentially no two countries that have a McDonald's have ever been to war against each other, right? And I don't know if that's still true, but that was true back in the 1980s when that phrase was coined. And I think that to a degree, it's just a signal of how intertwined economies are, and the cost of war is greater than anything you could gain by war or conflict between two countries. And I think it's very important to keep our economies linked together because of this. We can improve each other over time. And I don't see us as being enemies. I see us as being rivals, right? And there's nothing wrong with rivalry. It's very healthy. So Westflix says, what is your take on fuel cell stock? So I don't know how long you've been watching my channel, but I've been a massive, massive fan of hydrogen fuel cell technology for many, many years. But I have made this statement before that I think that the window for hydrogen fuel cell technology got passed. And let me explain that a little bit. So we don't do things in our transportation economy based on efficiency. A hydrogen fuel cell economy has actually always been the more efficient way to go. Wheel-to-well efficiency, essentially, with hydrogen fuel cell vehicles would be about 25%. 25% efficient, right? Gasoline vehicles would essentially be about 15% efficient. And based on the technology we had when we started creating this gasoline economy, even something like an ethanol economy would have been well. So we don't really do things based on their supposed efficiency. And I do like the fact that you can create this clean energy source. You could even use clean energy to do it. The problem with the hydrogen fuel cell infrastructure is this: nothing that we have right now in place is actually reusable. You can't take lines for compressed natural gas or liquid natural gas or whatever it is and use those same pipelines to transport hydrogen. Hydrogen is just, the H2 molecule is so small that it's just going to escape no matter what you try and pump it through. So you have to use different mechanisms of transportation, liquefaction, compression. In other words, hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars of new infrastructure would have to be developed for a hydrogen fuel cell economy, to power transportation. That is not the case with a battery electric world. All of the infrastructure is already there. It already exists. Essentially everyone in the United States has a 220 volt line for setup for a washer and dryer, or you can use that to that line itself to set up your battery charger, or you can have an electrician come out to your house and do that for you. I was reading somewhere that essentially 63% of homes would have that level 2 charger available to them in the United States. And we're looking at street charging showing up over and over in many, many places now. I'm starting to see it in San Diego, where I normally live. I'm actually on vacation now visiting my dad. But I think the last time I checked that there are like 1,340 different charging stations, with over 1,000 of those being free in San Diego. I'm not sure how they count those, but they're starting to show up in all over. When they start to show up on city streets, when they start to show up at paid parking and things like that in city streets, that's when we're really kind of on the way. And in the wealthier neighborhoods right now in certain cities, you're starting to see literally lines run all the way out to the street from homes. And I think that's really, really impressive. But anyway, so it's happening. It's happening pretty much on the schedule that I'm great at predicting these things, but it's happening pretty much on the schedule that I thought it would. When I started being interested in Tesla, I thought that in 30 years, we'd all be driving electric cars. That pretty much looks like it's going to happen, maybe a little bit faster on that timeline, especially now that there's this building and mounting enthusiasm for electric vehicles, not just with Tesla in the United States, but with the larger automakers as well, everyone, it seems like everyone in the electric vehicle industry wants to see GM and Ford die and something else replace them, like Tesla and Lucid and all that. I don't necessarily want to see them die. I want to see them evolve. I want to see them survive. And I want Tesla to have a healthy level of competition. I did a video recently on Lordstown where I thought that I was the thumbnail was, click on me thumbnail, but I thought I did a relatively objective job of saying, look, this is what happened with Lordstown. I don't think Lordstown is a fraud. I just think that they made some statements that were embellished. But that is enough to affect their ability to raise money from capital markets. And it's going to make it difficult for them going forward. I don't want to see Lordstown fail. I want Lordstown Motors to be successful. I think that the most competitive and most interesting and most innovative portion of the electric vehicle market in the United States is going to be that pickup truck, right? The F-150 is the best-selling vehicle in the United States, has been for 40 years, and it really hasn't been a competition, right? So I think that the electrification of the pickup truck is going to be the real opportunity to break that model. Meaning, I think that eventually something new as a front runner is going to be introduced as the new best-selling vehicle, whether that's Rivian's vehicle, whether that's the Tesla Cybertruck, whether that's, I don't want it to be the Ford Lightning just because I'm sick of seeing Ford take the top title, right? But it could be a number of other things. All right. So anyway, in terms of fuel cell stock, so I haven't actually followed fuel cell itself lately. I do follow Ballard Power, and I do follow, I just can't remember the other name of the company right now. I can't remember the other name of the company right now. It's the one that everyone knows about, and it went up to like $74 a share. Then it crashed back to like $20 a share. It's been around forever for like almost 20 years. But most of these companies, I'm thinking Plug Power, PLUG, trades under Plug. Plug Power in general is a company that I've kind of been down on in the past, largely because they've drawn their leadership in that company from older folks, even far older than I am, and I realize that in terms of YouTube, I'm ancient. But they've drawn their leadership from the MBA class of people who dominated the legacy auto industry, and they've tried to shoehorn them into this. It's not all that new anymore, and it's not really emerging technology anymore. And I simply don't believe their claims. Their website is even outdated. They make comparisons to battery electric devices that are clearly comparisons to lead acid battery powered things rather than lithium ion powered things. So I just think that it's a 25-year science project that has never made a profit, that has found ways to stumble left and right, and has some unimaginative leadership. And that's really kind of as harsh as I get when it comes to companies, right? I don't really get much harsher than that. But I don't have an investment in Plug Power. If you are a short-term trader, I would say that there are still some opportunities in the short-term and intermediate term to drive some profit off of the fear of missing out and mania that's going to drive the price up again at some point. In terms of a long-term investment, you would not be betting on just fuel cells like hydrogen fuel cell, or like fuel cell itself being successful, or Plug Power being successful, or Ballard Power being successful. You're really betting on building this multi-billion-dollar, if not trillion-dollar infrastructure, and there just doesn't seem to be the interest to do that. Not on the scale that we're thinking, right? I think that there's a definite window for hydrogen fuel cells to make a big impact on maritime shipping. It just makes sense, right? To have a fueling station inside of ports. We know where you're going to refuel. We know where you're coming from. We know where you're going. We can put the infrastructure there for hydrogen in place, And so in the future, what you guys may or may not know about maritime shipping is most of these big container ships use something called bunker fuel that they burn when they're far away from ports. It's extremely dirty. It's basically a step above crude oil that they're burning. And this is why you see these giant plumes of smoke. I don't know how much you've been offshore, but when you're offshore, all these container ships that burn relatively cleanly inshore because they're using a different type of fuel, offshore, they just belch out smoke, right? And sometimes they don't even do that when they're inshore. It kind of depends on the regulations of the different ports. Well, a lot of these ports now are going to sort of zero. They're asking for these shipping companies to be zero emissions sometime far out in the future, which would mean they have to have some sort of battery electric drive or some sort of fuel cell drive. There are already hydrogen fuel cell container ships being developed right now. Japan, Norway, and France all have projects to do this. I think that's where that makes the most amount of sense, is in maritime shipping, is where we could see hydrogen fuel cells make a real impact. And in that case, you're probably looking at Ballard Power being the leader, because they're the ones that really are ahead in this type of technology. If this was 10 years ago, I would have bet on Plug Power ending up being the leader in that technology. They just went a different direction, and I don't think they can recover at this point. So, who was it? Have you changed your mind on Palantir? You had a bearish take on it a while back, if I'm not mistaken. This is what Mavericks Abor says. Hey guys, sorry if I mispronounce your names. Number one, not wearing my glasses right now, so I can't really. I'm having a hard time kind of seeing my little tiny laptop screen. But let's talk about Palantir right now. I wouldn't say that I have a bearish approach on Palantir. I appreciate their ability to get contracts, but I think a lot of the investor interest in Palantir is based off of their mystique, which they have carefully cultivated. So I know how most of these companies operate in terms of how they visualize data. And let's talk about what Palantir does. So I just actually recently consulted on a financial project that used Palantir software, and I got a window in to see kind of exactly how it works and what it is that they're doing. And look, what they do is very important, but it's a lot less than what many people think that they're doing. They really help you to visualize relationships between data, right? That's really what the software does. And this, if you don't have the sort of experience in the IT industry that I do, it may be a little confusing here. But it actually is an excellent visualization tool. But a lot of the back-end programming that you need to do data analytics, that is not done by Palantir. That's not done by the engineers that they have on site. You basically ask them to draw these relationships between these different unconnected databases, and then you have to find someone to write the programs to sort of decipher that data and perform analytics on that, right? So how successful do I think they're going to be? They have a number of competitors in this space, including a lot of people you folks haven't heard about that are public, aren't interested in that are public, and a lot of private companies. But I think the big thing about Palantir and what it's really doing, and this is the great thing that Palantir has done, is it's taking some of the venture capital dollars away from Silicon Valley. And it's not because Palantir moved to Colorado. It's just because this sort of defense-oriented and government-oriented project has never really attracted sort of public funding from these large venture capital firms. That's starting to change. There are a few companies so I live in the San Diego area in Southern California, which you may or may not know, has some of the largest concentration of military in the entire United States, if not the largest concentration of military in the United States. I don't know if that's true or not. But it also has one of the largest concentrations of military contractors outside of the Washington, D.C. area, right? So a lot of money from Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and Silicon Valley venture capital firms is now pouring into these smaller defense-oriented firms, and most of them are cybersecurity firms, which I think is very interesting, and data analytics firms and AI. A lot of the money is coming to San Diego, which is very, very exciting. So, and part of that is because I think people realize at this point that if we can all work remote, then why do we all need to be stacked up in San Francisco? We can move to other cities, that sort of thing. Part of it is the recognition that there is now, and there always have been, great investment opportunities out of the Silicon Valley area. So we're seeing Austin become a hub for entrepreneur dollars and venture capital. We're seeing Miami become a hub. We're probably going to see the Research Triangle in North Carolina become a technology hub as well. All of these things I find very, very exciting. Chris Palmer, thank you very much for using the super chat features or the super sticker features. I don't know which one that is, but those super chat features are on, folks. If you feel like you'd like to use one of those stickers, let me know. Okay, so yeah, so am I bearish on Palantir? The answer is not necessarily bearish on Palantir, but I'm very neutral on Palantir. This is a company that is mature. It has lost money for a number of years, but in a way that I can respect, though. But at this point right now, Alice Carper literally said in the interview that one of the reasons that they went public was not necessarily to expand operations, but was to reward long-term employees. I mean, you are going to see some selling pressure from insiders in Palantir because they worked there for 18 years. The way their pay structure works is they don't make that much money, right? And you make everything based on like stock options. And now that they've gone public, here's what I think is happening. And here's what I know is happening. The work environment there is not for everyone. A lot of really talented people there probably stuck around because of the stock option programs they had. I don't know if they use ISOs, which are incentive stock options, or RSUs, which are restricted stock units. I don't know if these people have access to like an 83B election or anything like that, but it may be an opportune time for them to sell out of their positions and exit the company, right? So you may see some selling pressure on the stock going forward for the next year or two, and you may actually see some of their top talent leave and go to other startups. And they're going to have to probably change their compensation structure a little bit as well. They've got a great story. I know that I've talked to a couple of employees now who contacted me because of some of the things that I said on YouTube. And they talked to me about the work environment, and they talked to me about how you get caught up working in the company of, doing something that supports Western values, doing something that you think, supports Americanism in a lot of ways, which there's nothing wrong with that. There's many, many things that I love about our society. But you get caught up in that and you make sacrifices on how much you should be paid, the abuse you're willing to take from management and that sort of thing, because you think you're furthering the mission of the company, right? I think as a company becomes public, and that's going to change a little bit. I worked for another company, SEIC, years ago, that when they went public, that aspect of their culture changed greatly. We went from being extremely mission oriented to just being a company that needed to make numbers in the next quarter. And one of these days, I'll tell the SAIC story in detail, but that was very, very interesting. But anyway, is Palantir going to do well in the future? I think they will. They've shown a remarkable aptitude for getting government contracts, and that by itself is a great skill to have. I know a lot of people were making some comments over their security clearance. I would say ignore those comments. There are other companies out there that aren't publicly traded that have the same level of security clearance out there. It's actually easier to do if you don't have to report certain things. It's far easier to do if you don't have foreigners or people who are married to foreigners working for your company to get that level of security clearance. And this is something that if you work here in San Diego in IT, that you dealt with this all the time. And so these are things that I'm kind of familiar with. But no, I'm not that bearish on it, but I'm not that. I have 100 shares of Palantir. I don't have any more just because it's something that I want to keep on my radar, but I am not willing to dip into that until they start showing an improvement in profitability, essentially. So have I changed my mind? No, I'm still pretty much the same. Like I said, I'd like to change my mind. So do you think Lucid will be a success? This is what Rocketman III says. So do I think that Lucid will be a success? All right. So let's talk about that for a minute. Up until the last couple of weeks, really, people could talk about what they thought they knew about Lucid, but very few people had seen the inside of their factory. Very few people had seen what their vehicles can actually do, except in videos where you couldn't really see any detail. And there weren't a lot of third parties that had gotten to drive any of their vehicles. That's changed to some degree at this point now, and we have a little bit more information. And let me be clear, I want Lucid to be successful. I want them to be that true competitor in that top range of things. I really do. My concern is when I saw the video of the factory, and this may be, I may not be getting a complete picture of what's going on in the factory, but what I saw was a lot of labor being done by hand and far less automation than you would see in a Tesla factory. Now, I didn't see the factories early on in Tesla, right? There just wasn't a lot of interest in seeing those factories early on. I didn't see a lot of video from that. So maybe it was like that back in the beginning for Tesla too. Lucid is still following that Tesla blueprint as well. They're entering the market in that extreme high end of vehicles. They're making a very expensive, high margin vehicle by necessity, and they're going to use that profit to work their way down the value chain. Now, somebody who's in my Patreon group, who lives in the Silicon Valley area, has made this point a couple of times, and I believe that it's true. He can walk around anywhere in Silicon Valley, and on every corner and on every street, you're going to see Teslas. They're extremely popular. And there's really one model that dominates. It's the Tesla Model 3, and everything else is probably less than 20% of the cars you're going to see that are Teslas in San Francisco, right? In the San Francisco area. And he thinks that there's always going to be a person who's going to look around and say, well, everyone else has a Tesla. I'm going to buy this Lucid. That's actually true. In fact, I'm one of those guys with those tendencies. If everyone else is doing something, then I'm going to do something different. My question is that a valid business strategy? I'm going to say that it is actually a valid business strategy, and a lot of companies have operated this way in the past, where they really, and I'm not saying that Lucid doesn't have a superior product or doesn't have an equal product, but there were plenty of companies out there that had shit products, had crap products compared to their competitors, and still ended up being a successful enterprise just because of that tendency. So I think that, I do think that there's a window of opportunity for Lucid. Are they going public? I think sometime in mid-July. They're actually going to complete their merger. I haven't been following them. I don't own shares in this company. This is by the time I really got interested in it, the share price was ridiculous. It's back down to a level where I would consider investing in it, but based on the way that most SPACs have gone recently, I'm probably not going to do that. I'm going to wait until a little bit after their, probably the first quarter or two when they report earnings, and that's when I'll probably dip my toes. Yeah. Okay. User JJA says, what's your take on companies focusing on EV buses in the EV space like Proterra and Lion Electric? They have competition from someone who's been doing it for a long time and is successful at it, and that is BYD. BYD has a factory in California where they make electric buses. They have electric buses in service here in the United States and a couple of cities in Montreal and a couple of other cities in Canada. They have them in place in Europe as well. I think that those companies are going to face some pretty stiff competition and relatively quickly. BYD has the money, has the manufacturing expertise, and has the manufacturing capacity to bury any. That's going to be a thin market, right? There just aren't going to be that many providers. This actually is one market that I don't see Tesla stepping into. I see someone else dominating in that place. Speaking of Tesla, I'm really looking forward. So I actually had the opportunity to see the Tesla Semi in action on I-10. And I don't know if they were testing. I don't know if they were hauling something, but I briefly paced a Tesla. Unfortunately, I'm not like you, a lot of younger folks out there. I can't use my camera on my phone and operate a vehicle at the same time without dying. But I did get a chance to see it. I was very impressed by it. It didn't do anything special. It was just driving down the road, and I paced it for a couple of miles along with 100 other people until I had to make my exit. Trust me, it got a lot of attention. I'm sure a video of it showed up online somewhere. But yeah, it was very interesting. Do I think that these other companies have a chance? I think chances for a lot of these companies are narrowing now that so much money from legacy automakers is going into developing their own line of products. I really do. I think most of the EV SPACs, or most of them, are actually going to fail at this point. That's based on the experience that I've seen from, and so the research that I've seen from every other technological revolution, is that roughly 95% of the companies that begin in these technological revolutions are actually going to be consumed by larger companies or going to end up going out of business. Being consumed by a larger company is not necessarily a failure. It means you got bought out, and sometimes the buyout terms are really, really good, right? And sometimes they aren't. I would see probably if Lion Electric became moderately successful, they'd be acquired by someone else. Are you an investor in Airbnb? You're talking Top Trader 23. You're talking about Airbnb. I don't have my Yahoo thing in front of me. I'm just going to assume that you're talking about Airbnb. I'm not an investor in Airbnb. I like the company. I think it's going to do just fine. I think that Airbnb is massively overvalued based on what they're making and what their potential is. And also, I don't really see them developing an ecosystem that's exclusive. Like, they're not going to become the Amazon of home rentals. It's that industry just doesn't work that way. And I think that you're going to see, you already have a couple of stiff competitors out there. They're all developing their own ecosystems, where there's another app that I didn't use it. I think my cousin used it recently to book an entire trip on it. He booked everything from his car to his house that he's on, that he wanted to rent on the beach, to the jet skis and the boat that he wanted to rent out. And he did this all in Florida. I can't remember the name of the app that he used, but I was impressed that you couldn't necessarily do all of that through Airbnb, but you could do everything through this app that he used. If I remember what that app was, or if I find it again and talk to him, I'll talk to you guys about that and let you know. But yeah, but I am, so I'm not all that bullish on Airbnb, just because I think that their finances need to catch up to their valuation. In terms of CCIV or Lucid, I want to be bullish on them, man. I really, really do. I want to see how well they sell in those first couple of months, though. That's what I'm really afraid of, is that their price point is very, very high, and they're entering a market unlike Tesla, where there's lots of competition in that high price point, right? So yeah. Anonymous, luxury is handmade like Porsche. Yes, luxury. Is Porsche all that handmade, or are we thinking more like Lamborghini is really handmade? I'm not sure that Porsche is really all that much handmade. So the problem with luxury being handmade is that when you have things that are handmade, you have to pay the people who have those hands, right? And labor is one of your most expensive things in any enterprise. I don't know if you guys own your own business, but I own a couple of businesses, and labor is my largest expense by far, even more than rent in some instances. Anonymous says, XPEV is greater than Tesla, is greater than Lucid. XPEV will be number one in the EV sector. I don't know that that's necessarily true. So if you look at the dynamics of the Chinese market, and I can tell you that none of us here really understand, in the United States, we really don't understand the complete dynamics of the Chinese market, because we don't really have a complete understanding of Chinese culture. And when I say we don't have a complete understanding of Chinese culture, I don't think there is a way for any one person to understand it, right? No company in China really dominates the car market there. They have hundreds of different automakers. I think at last count, it was like over 130, and that was in September when I counted them. None of those car companies, and even the foreign car companies there, have more than a 14% market share. And VW actually is the largest car seller in all of China, right? Including internal combustion engines, electric vehicles, everything. They're the largest car seller. So part of that is politics. Part of that is prestige. Part of that is class. But a lot of it's actually regional rivalry. XPEV is a company that's based in southern China, and NIO is a company that's based in Shanghai. And they're not Shanghai. Are they based in Shanghai? Yeah, I think they're based in Shanghai. Anyway, there is always going to be a regional rivalry there. Just like what I said, where people are going to be a bit contrarian, some people are going to buy Lucid no matter what. That, to a degree, is one of the things that's fueling the success of both companies at this point. Is there's going to be a regional rivalry with people in southern China who are going to drive XPEV, people in northern China who are going to aspire to drive NIO. Right now, these companies aren't really competing in the same markets either. They don't have vehicles that compete with each other. That's going to change here, I think, pretty soon. I think that both companies are trying to work. XPEV is clearly with the P5 trying to work their way down market to a cheaper vehicle. Yeah, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but the G3 SUV, compact SUV from XPEV, you can get a version of that for about $20,000 and it has it has an NEDC range that's much higher than this, but the actual range of the vehicle is about 180 miles. And NEDC range, guys, knock off anywhere from 20 to 30% on those range estimates, and that's probably the realistic range of the vehicle, right? So if NIO says that their new vehicle is going to have a 600-mile range, knock off 20 to 30% of that. That's the actual range, okay? Will XPEV be number one in this sector? I actually think, to a degree, they have a better shot at being number one than NIO does. Now, I've said this numerous times. I actually hold a lot more NIO stock than I do XPEV. Part of it is by accident. I bought a lot of it when it was sub $5 a share, once again, mostly on speculation. And I've even had to sell some of it because it's grown so much that it became more than 10% of my overall net worth, which I don't let anything become more than 10% of my overall net worth, right? So I ended up selling some of that stock. But XPEV's expertise in manufacturing is actually astounding. They have two new factories that are under construction right now. These are all fully automated factories. You have one of their factories that should be completed sometime, I think, in October, November of next year. It's going to have a production capacity of somewhere north of 100,000 units, and it's only going to have 600 employees. Almost all of those employees are either going to be engineers, like people with engineering degrees who actually do engineering, or cleaning staff. And that's pretty much it. This is an extremely efficient operation that has cut out one of the largest sources of expenses, which is labor, and it's replaced them with automation. They're called their smart manufacturing facilities. When you look at the things that they're publishing, that they're allowing the public to see, and you look at their plans in terms of intelligent robots, and they actually have a separate subsidiary right now that is really a company that is just going to produce manufacturing robots to sell to other manufacturing companies. I don't know if you guys knew that or not. I did cover that in a video that I made back in December about that. But they started that subsidiary back in December, and they ended up getting like $100 million in funding almost immediately from a couple of different sources. So there hasn't been any news on what they're doing with that subsidiary yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing that. Heechao and XPEV Motors, I think, owned combined 63% of the company. So yeah, it's definitely a very much it's controlled by XPEV. So so what Billy Yee says, what are your thoughts on agricultural tech, greenhouse farming, AI-assisted harvesting? Is farming the next sector prime for disruption after EVs and fintech? Billy, you're asking a question that I'm actually really interested in, but I haven't considered it from that angle at all. Like, I'm very much into gardening and farming and different techniques. Very interested in aquaculture or aquaponics. I don't know if you guys know what that is. Basically using fish waste to grow food. Extremely interested in that. Is it prime for disruption after EVs and fintech? That is something that I simply haven't considered, but it is something I'm going to think about. You may have given me a really good video idea. I've always thought that aquaponics could be the next big thing in food tech. And it's just, somebody could probably do it in a way that's a little more simple, a little more energy efficient than I did it. And I had an operation going for a while, and I shut it down because I wanted to replace it with a solar powered, basically I wanted all my pumps and everything to be solar powered. And I just need to come up with the money to buy all the solar panels and batteries and all that stuff. And then I'm going to restart my aquaponics garden. That's small scale though. I have seen some really large scale operations in, I think, Encinitas, California. And there's another one in Indiana that's supposed to be huge. So yeah, I think that's a possibility. That is a good idea for another video, Billy. Thank you very much. Peter Liapa says, what about LCKO? That is a company that's on my radar that I have not looked into yet. A number of people in my Patreon group are interested in that. A couple of folks in my Patreon group have gone in big on this stock. And I'm not sure why. I took a look at it real briefly a month or two ago, but I haven't had the time to go back and really do an in-depth dive on it. So Anonymous says a G3i looks way better. I assume you're talking about XPEV's SUV. Yeah. JJA says, I understand your point, but will Biden's infrastructure policy likely support a made in America EV company like Proterra or BID, which is from China? So there's actually some problems in the world court here with our policies in the past that have favored American vehicles. We end up getting sued by foreign manufacturers. Right? There is a limit to which I don't understand why there's a limit to what the United States can do to promote U.S. interests, right, in domestic markets, and why there is not a limit to what a government like China can do or Russia can do when promoting their own companies within their own borders. I don't understand why that is, but many times when we have created subsidy programs targeted U.S. companies, we have to make those available to foreign companies as well, like the tax credits right now that are available to electric vehicle automakers and the regulatory credits. Those are actually available to everyone. Everyone can collect those. Just Tesla has been the one collecting those and selling those because they have been the only electric vehicle manufacturer for a long time. That's going away, which means also that Tesla's sales of regulatory credits are going to be going away at some point as well. So Anonymous says that XPEV is into water vehicles and flying drones as well. That is very interesting. If you guys have never been to the Gas Goo Auto News website, they have a lot of obscure news out of the Chinese automotive sector that is that you're not going to see anywhere else reported in media. And that is one of the things reported is that XPEV filed a bunch of patents for for electric drones. So I found it to be very, very interesting. One of the other interesting articles that I read, and I posted this in my Patreon group, I posted this on the Discord chat in my Patreon group, is that Geely Auto, one of the largest companies, one of the largest vehicle manufacturers in the world that most people don't know about. They hold a number of racing records. They sell vehicles in, I think, 30 different countries. But they had an astounding rise in sales over the last year, and the electric vehicle portion of that has gotten larger and larger and larger. BYD put out some numbers where they had an astounding rise. They sold 51,000 vehicles in the last month, and the share of oil-powered vehicles or internal combustion engine vehicles is declined by about 30%, and that's been replaced by electric vehicles. BYD is actually in outselling NIO, it's outselling XPEV, it's outselling Li combined, and it's something that's not getting a lot of press here in the U.S. I've said for as long as I've had my channel now and been covering individual stocks, I've said that BYD is extremely impressive and extremely important, and that has not changed. They've only gotten more impressive in that time frame. So JJA says, will the Chinese government start to clamp down on Chinese EV companies once they get too big? So they haven't really had so here's something that's going to change with the Chinese auto industry. The Chinese auto industry in the internal combustion era was never going to evolve. They tried to break into foreign markets over and over and over. I think the first actual Chinese auto company, the real auto company, I think it may have actually been Geely, and that was like 1997. It was when they made their first real Chinese passenger vehicle targeted at the civilian market, right? I think it may have been literally that late. But throughout the late 1990s and the early 2000s through the 2010s, every time that I would go to an auto show, I would see Chinese vehicles there. And quality at that time was just laughable. Quality of the things that could be fixed, right? You can make a car that has a great interior and is still shoddy on the inside, and you can fool people into buying it. And I'm thinking kind of what Korean cars did when they first came over here. They looked just fine on the interior, but the engines were crap, right? And they didn't last very long. And all that's changed as they moved up the value chain. Hyundai, and I made fun of Hyundai's not too long ago, and I probably shouldn't have, because my opinion on Hyundai is really based on my experience with them 20 years ago, and that company has just improved so much. Chinese companies were likely never to go through that evolution, though, because of the contract manufacturing relationships that they had with Western automakers for parts, for drivetrains, for all this, they had no incentive to have any sort of innovation whatsoever for like a 15-year time period in their manufacturing. And they made no effort to keep up with changes in technology because they didn't have to, because they kept getting these contract production orders from Western manufacturers to make parts and things like that. That is something that the CEO of Geely, I can't remember his name right now, has commented on numerous times over and over and over. And he was frustrated with these arrangements and thought that they stifled innovation. And I think that it's pretty clear now, and he made these comments sometime around like 2010. And I think it's pretty clear now that he was absolutely correct in that respect, that is what was kind of holding them back. That has all changed now. In 2014, Tesla released all their patents for public use. As long as you didn't copy their designs outright, you could use their technology to do whatever you wanted to. And that's when NIO and XPeng started, and then maybe a year later Li started. They went in a little bit different direction. So like literally, Li Auto, XPeng and NIO are based on Tesla's technology, right? That is what they are based on. They've gone their own direction since then, but that's what they were based on. But not by choice, because of economic circumstances, where they made this partnership with JAC, which was a state-owned manufacturer. It's a fairly sophisticated state-owned manufacturer. In the past, I would have said that no state-owned manufacturer could ever compete with a privately owned enterprise, just because of entrenched interests would prevent you from innovating. That paradigm, to a degree, has been turned on its head with JAC. But here's my issue with JAC. They make their own vehicles. They make NIO's vehicles. And the other thing is they make NIO's competitors' vehicles. And in fact, they make one of their largest competitors' vehicles, and that is VW. JAC has a subsidiary that is now mostly owned by VW that produces electric vehicles as well. So JAC's concentration as their manufacturing partner is not necessarily going to be on NIO in the future. Now, one of the things that has changed is that now NIO can go out at any time they want to and raise money from private markets to start building their own factory. They are building this giant electric, I forget, it's called NIO Park or something like that, but it's basically a giant electric vehicle and innovation campus that's going to be built in Hefei, I think. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct. But it's going to be built somewhere around that area. And it's going to be this multi-billion dollar place that supposedly has a production capacity of vehicles of about at least 100,000, with room to expand production even more. But more importantly, it's going to have all of these research and development facilities that are pretty much attached to these manufacturing facilities that are it's going to allow for a lot of cooperation, a lot of innovation. And the regional government there is actually actively going out and searching for talent worldwide to bring them to this region of China. Right? They're not making this a China-only enterprise. They're bringing in designers from Germany. They're bringing in engineers from from Sweden. They're bringing in software techs from the United States. So this is a truly international enterprise at this point for NIO, and it's the same thing for XPeng. There's a not well publicized office of software developers of XPeng in San Diego, as well as in Silicon Valley. They have offices here in the United States. BYD is not as smart as XPeng. I assume that you mean in terms of their AI technology. That's true. They're not as smart as XPeng. But what they can do is buy those AI brains from other developers. There are other companies out there that are developing this technology. It's not simply XPeng. And I think that's one of the things. The pace of innovation, I don't think you're going to see that slow down as this industry matures. Not at this point right now, especially when you have all these third-party players out there right now that they're not developing a vehicle. They're only developing the software. Think about what happened with the computer revolution. It wasn't the people that manufactured computers that ended up making all of the money in the PC revolution. It was the software makers writing things on top of who could make the computer sing that ended up making all of the money in that revolution. I think that we may be looking at something like that happening with electric vehicles as well, is that a lot of the software, I think it's pretty certain. I did a video a long time ago on sort of the open source vision of electric vehicles. And I think that vision I had back then is really starting to come true with Geely's C platform, with Hyundai's platform, and with the Canoe's platform. I think that what you're going to see is people selling essentially a skateboard platform. You're going to see a company that manufactures the body and everything on top of that, and you're going to see a separate third company come in that makes software and to run the vehicle. And you're going to see these pop-up vehicle companies pop up left and right over the next 10 to 20 years. And I think, and because electric vehicles are so much simpler to make that my stepmom is coming in here to bring me cookies, or what are you bringing me here?
Avocado toast.
Avocado toast. I'm a millennial now. I'm having avocado toast. Okay. I am a millennial now.
I forgot about avocado.
Okay, I'm live. Cheryl, see you. Bye-bye. So anyway, visiting my dad and my stepmom. My stepmom brings me avocado toast and coffee. Thank you very much. Totally lost my train of thought. And there's also a squirrel trying to break in the house right now, like literally trying to break in the house. Anyway, totally lost my train of thought on that. So are there any worries with buying Chinese stocks through Cayman Islands Holdings? I believe they're called ADRs. Patrick, no, ADRs are really, really old, and it's pretty common to have those holdings through the Cayman Islands, and there used to be a few other places to do that. That's pretty common. Almost every company that trades as an ADR on a U.S. exchange almost every company is going to be organized through the Cayman Islands, and that's done for tax purposes and reporting purposes. They just don't require reporting. They report in their own home districts, and they report in the United States. But that doesn't, they don't want to have to report everywhere. So there's other reasons behind that I don't really know or I'm not really interested in. But no, it's very common for companies that traded as ADRs to be completely legit that are organized in the Cayman Islands. Raul Gill says, DD. So not an investor in DD. Not an investor in ride-hailing services, largely because I just don't know where they're going to end up vis-a-vis what all these car companies are going to do when it comes to ride-hailing services on their own. I don't know if DD's software would simply be adopted by an existing electric vehicle maker, or they would make their own when we start making that transition to autonomous vehicles. So I've long suspected that true autonomy for vehicles and robo-taxis is probably further away than we think it is. But I still see that coming eventually. I just don't think it's coming this year, true autonomy. I would love to be wrong on this, guys. I would really love to be wrong, but I don't think it's coming this year. I don't even necessarily think it's coming in the next 5 years. And that's not how I base, and I don't base my personal valuation on where I think Tesla stock is going to do based on all the money that would come in from robo-taxis. I don't, right? So I base a lot of my valuation on where I think Tesla is going to be, of course, on software sales that include full self-driving that I don't think is going to exist for the next 5 years or so. And anyway, that's just my personal opinion. After speaking to a number of folks that I know that I went to school with who are now computer scientists, they're not, and they tell me themselves, like, we aren't on the forefront of this particular field of technology. We could be wrong on this, but these are the hurdles we see that are in place right now to prevent this from happening. And they made over a couple of beers, they made a pretty compelling case to me that you're at least 5 years away from real autonomy, which I think a lot of people would be disappointed by. And that erodes some of the confidence in the technology lead that we think that Tesla has over their competition right now. And JJA says, will the Chinese government start to clamp down on Chinese EV companies once they get too big? Yeah, so back on that, like you said, there aren't any manufacturers in China that are too big right now because of destructive competition. That's where I was going with that long-winded explanation of the Chinese auto industry. No company in that country really dominates the market. So I think that they see that market being regulated by competition. The Chinese Communist Party really isn't all that communist. And I say that jokingly because it's not communist at all. If you have a stock market and private enterprises and companies competing, then you don't have a communist economy and you don't even have a socialist economy. You have a capitalist economy with Chinese characteristics, as they say it. Those Chinese characteristics are autocracy, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion. I don't really get into politics on this, but I did want to say that they are just as much integrated into the capitalist world as the United States is. So in terms of Didi, though, I have yet to understand why exactly the Chinese government is cracking down on Didi over privacy concerns. The government themselves is not concerned with privacy concerns. You can't use any of their social media apps at all without being monitored by the government. That may be the case here in the United States or in Europe as well, but we just don't realize it or something like that. But that's what I really didn't understand. I think this is another case of them throwing their weight around to make it be known, to basically slap people down a little bit and make them fall in a line, like they did with Jack Ma, who was a very loud and troublesome billionaire. He made a speech that I thought was relatively innocuous and was legitimate concerns about policies that the Chinese government had in terms of fintech, and legitimate criticism that should have been listened to and addressed. And he was made to disappear for a few months over that. That's just the difference between their culture and our culture, right? Yeah, it's a huge difference in my opinion. But all right, so Anonymous says XPEV is already in Norway and soon whole of Europe. XPEV is only dual listed China EV company. Yeah, but they won't be the only dual listed one for long. NIO filed their paperwork to be dual listed back in March. So I covered that. I think I covered that in the video, but they filed that along with XPEV and Li back in March. You'll see NIO sometime after NIO Power Day. They're going to announce a secondary offer. I think they'll probably announce a secondary offering here in the United States, as well as a listing on the Hong Kong Exchange. I think they want to raise somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.6 to $4 billion to accommodate new models that are coming out, new research, and to build more manufacturing facilities. I think that is the most impressive thing, is that both of these companies are building their manufacturing facilities from the ground up. They're reimagining the way that cars are being manufactured, much like Tesla did, and they're both improving on what Tesla did, and Tesla's improving on what Tesla did. And yeah, so in terms of battery technology, I don't buy that NIO is, and I was overly enthusiastic about this on NIO Day when they came out with their announcement of a solid state battery that was going to power the ET7. Now, there are two Chinese startups that claim to have in production some small scale, medium scale solid state batteries. Then they actually have like scale production for them. I haven't seen anything published on those in terms of durability tests. And this is what we're really worried about when it comes to solid state batteries, is dendrite growth that would end up sort of piercing the membrane between the cathode and the anode, which would cause a short in the battery, and it would cause it just to not work anymore, right? And think of dendrites as this, basically like tree roots of like mineral deposits that look like tree roots, and they start to grow over time in these batteries, and they eventually pierce that membrane, and it causes an electrical short. And it's not going to, unlike regular batteries, though, it shouldn't cause a fire. I don't know that it will, guaranteed not to, but it shouldn't cause a fire. So that has been the issue with solid state batteries, is no one has figured out a way to stop that battery from growing these dendrites, right? I haven't seen anything published, any white papers published, or anything leaked, or any new chemistry from any of these companies that would make me think that this problem has been solved. And this is true for not just those two Chinese startups that are making solid state batteries, but also for Prologis, also for QuantumScape here. What I see is this technology is coming out. These problems are going to be solved. We're looking at limited run production in 2024, scale production by 2028. QuantumScape is the one company that I do not understand. People make too big a deal out of a company being backed by another larger company. A lot of times they're making a speculative play on something they think might, and remember, the people making these decisions are human as well. But especially in terms of QuantumScape, I have been scouring scientific journals to find anyone connected to their company that's publishing anything really interesting on battery chemistry, and I haven't found anything. I really haven't found anything that leads me to believe that they've solved. I've said this in another video that I would be in QuantumScape if it was under $20. I think it's still not interested in that, because they are 4 years away from any revenues whatsoever for battery production. They're not even making solid watches or something like that, which is a market they could be entering into, right? But they're at least 4 years away from any sort of revenue whatsoever, and maybe 7 to 8 years away from scaled production of their batteries. It's a science project right now. It's a very interesting science project that's looking to solve some very intriguing problems, but it's not a business, and it's not worth $70 or $130 like it was before. $70, it's not worth $20. If it was under $20 in 2024, I would probably invest in it then. But even $20 today, there's just too much uncertainty when it comes to QuantumScape, which, like I said, all of that lack of activity on the scientific front. Because what a lot of people don't realize when it comes to scientists is that their currency, the currency that they trade in, is actually prestige in what they publish. It's very hard to keep a group of scientists who don't work for the government and haven't signed their life away in terms of non-disclosure agreements that are enforceable under penalty of imprisonment. It's very hard to keep them quiet. Things leak just like they do with Tesla, and things get published in white papers that should be clues for other. This is one of the big clues when it came to Nikola. One of the ways you could tell that they had nothing in the way of their own technology is that no one working for the company published a damn thing. No one published anything whatsoever, and there weren't any really juicy leaks, right? I think it's pretty clear that some of the leaks that come out of Tesla are deliberately leaked by Tesla to create interest in some of the things that they're doing. But in the case of of QuantumScape, there just isn't anything out there. Like, are they a fraud? No, they're not a fraud. It's just a company that probably went public a little bit too soon in order to raise money to spend this on research. I think they're actually going to end up getting. I know they've already been sued once. They'll probably end up getting sued over and over and over again for making promises that they can't fulfill for years. So, yeah. Wait, Alstom remembers the limits of the U.S. Us. Okay, Patrick. Okay. So, any price predictions for NEO and XPEV by the end of the year? Are today's prices good entry prices? So, JJ, if you've been looking at my channel for a while, you know that I don't really make price predictions for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm an extremely long-term investor. Number two, I don't think that price predictions are all that useful in the real world as far as what is my target price. First of all, define what you mean by target price. Right? If I buy a stock at 20 and my target price is 40, what does that stock mean? Is the stock fully valued at 40? Or do I think the stock's not going to go up after 40, right? So a price target is just a very good way that YouTubers and other analysts create these psychological limits to where they can say, I was right or you were wrong, right? So I don't really do that because I don't think they serve, like, I would say that NEO at this point is already fully valued in terms of the traditional metrics, which mean absolutely nothing for a company at this stage right now of expansion, and XPEV as well. They don't mean anything. In terms of any metric, they're already overvalued, right? Based on what their current earnings are. In terms of what I think their future earnings are going to be, I have a target in mind for NEO that is far lower than most people do. I think that at $130 a share, that's probably where they're going to reach the limits of how much market share they're going to grab, how much production they're going to be able to. I think that NEO has a shot at being more successful overseas than XPEV does. I think that XPEV has a greater shot of probably dominating the local market because of the particular sectors that they're concentrated in. But I think that 10 years from now, NEO is probably going to be making somewhere in the range of 1.7 to 2 million vehicles per year. They're going to have roughly 10% of market share in China, and they're going to be selling a significant volume of vehicles outside of China, but probably not under 500,000 or so, right? They're still going to be selling outside of China, but maybe under 500,000. Their stock would be worth somewhere north of $130 a share exiting my position. And this would mean that I've held on to the stock now for like 13 years, right? That's how long-term that I think. Based on prediction of a $300 run was probably not taking into account all of the dilution that has taken place. The float is actually huge for NEO. It's actually, I looked this up on Yahoo Finance like 3 or 4 days ago, so the numbers may not be entirely accurate, but it looks like NEO's float is actually 3 times larger than XPEV's at this point. which would be, I mean, there's 3 times as many shares of NEO out there floating around than there are of XPEVs, which means that their share price really doesn't make sense at all when you look at how much NEO is selling versus how much XPEV is selling. Their numbers are really, really close, but there are 3 times as many NEO shares out there as XPEV, right? So that valuation doesn't make any sense at all to me right now. I think that XPEV should be probably a little bit higher, and NEO should probably be worth a little bit less. However, my opinion doesn't really mean that much. It's the market opinions that matters. But that 130 number is just a number based on some preliminary calculations that I've done here. You shouldn't take that as a price target or instructions to buy, sell, or hold any security whatsoever. But when NEO reaches $130 a share, I will reconsider my price model there and think about whether or not they have more of that exponential growth in place, or should I start a selling program at that point? And I tend to drip into stocks and drip out of stocks over time. If I do that, I don't do a ton of selling though. Okay. But yeah, I don't do a ton of price predictions in that case. And XPEV, like I said, their price prediction based on the float that they have right now would probably be a little bit higher than NEO's. So that's probably the first hard price that I've ever given on where I would think about disposing of NEO stock. So congratulations. You're the first one to get a price prediction out of me. But my price prediction for NEO is not $100 by the end of the year, or XPEV $100 by the end of the year. In fact, I think that you have a really good chance of. So here's a couple of catalysts that are going to propel NEO here in the next couple of. Actually, is NEO Power Day today? I don't know. I've kind of lost track of town. Lost track of time since I've been traveling. And if you guys haven't noticed, my background is different because this is an actual wall instead of a background. I'm visiting my father in another state right now. Just to remind you guys, super chat features are on if you guys were so inclined. I don't actually know how to use those myself, but they are on. But anyway, back to NEO here. So a couple of catalysts. Of course, we have NEO Power Day. And the other thing is Geely's management is telling us that their semiconductor shortage would ease by the end of July. And I don't know if that's because they just cut better deals than U.S. automakers do. I don't know if that's because the supply chain is just much shorter because it's in China, or I don't know if this even applies to all other manufacturers out there. But you would have to believe that a smaller and more nimble manufacturer like NEO, XPEV, or Li is probably going to have an even easier time finding those chips, right? They're just going to be more nimble. They're going to be able to adjust faster because they're much smaller. And I think that this, I think back in November when I made my original video on the coming semiconductor shortage, I predicted there was going to be a 9 to 12 month shortage. If that was November, we're pretty close to 9 months at that point. And I think in July, we should start to see that semiconductor shortage start to ease. By next year, the production of semiconductors is going to be back up to where it was post 2020. We're probably going to see a crash in semiconductor prices. I don't know if you guys have paid attention to the semiconductor market, but it's really, really well studied. And a lot of the panic that has been experienced by people in media right now is not shared by people who have long experience with semiconductors. And I've talked to a couple of analysts, and they simply are not panicked by this. They understand this is cyclical, but amplified cyclability. Nah, that's not a word. Anyway, that cycle has just been amplified because the supply chain contracted so much, and now it's taking a longer time to bring it back up. But yeah, Geely's made this announcement. I assume that announcement is going to come from other manufacturers here in the near future. All right. Let me see here. Georges Andre says, I think NEO said this morning that they will build about 100,000 swap stations for overseas purposes. Have you heard that? Or about 1,000 swap stations? Sorry, not 100,000 stations. I heard that that NEO Power is bringing their swap stations to Norway. Honestly, because Norway has Norway's most of the population is concentrated in the south of the country and along the coast. So maybe Norway is a really good place to do this because you going up the coast and then in the south of the country to where you that Denmark, because it was large port facilities and really small size, have been a better choice because you can actually to Scandinavia and easily drive things into the mainland of Europe. But hey, man, they did all their demographic research. I'm sure they know better than I do. Yeah, I have heard that they're bringing it there. And this is my issue with this. Like, I've never been a believer that swap was going to be a permanent solution. And I don't necessarily think that that NEO thinks that swap is a permanent solution either. I think that in the future, the infrastructure to charge is just going to be everywhere. And batteries already, like if you look at your lithium iron phosphate battery, it's about 14% less energy dense than your lithium manganese cobalt batteries, but it has a cycle range of anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 cycles, right? So let's say we hit that right in the middle. You have a battery that gets 250 miles of range with 4,500 cycles. You're looking at that battery, you're able to use that battery for 1.2 million miles before it goes below 70% efficiency, which at that point, that battery still has a life in the grid somewhere as stationary storage, right? So I think that battery swap is not going to last forever, especially when we have batteries that last. But already batteries last anywhere from 200,000 to 400,000 miles, right? Which is longer than the lifetime of the body of the vehicle in some cases. That you have some early Teslas already have like 600,000 miles on them and have swapped batteries twice, and it's still more efficient than owning an internal combustion engine. I think that with newer batteries, like I said, the lithium iron phosphate chemistry, I think is going to end up being a much more important and larger player in this market here in the future for a couple of reasons. Number two, politically problematic things like cobalt. Cobalt's not rare, but cobalt is just mined in a lot of conflict zones, so it's politically a hot potato there, and it can be more expensive when there's when conflict flares up. And just nickel's expensive as well, right? But lithium, iron, and phosphate are not expensive. They're abundant. They're everywhere. Easily mined lithium. Well, a lot of lithium is held in the ocean. Like we already have like desalination facilities. I don't imagine that it's that much more difficult to add lithium capture to desalination facilities. You may see places like Saudi Arabia and Israel become exporters of lithium sometime in the future. I don't know. Derived from their desalination efforts. That would be interesting. And that's something I've been thinking about and considering the chemistry behind that. But yeah, so I am very excited about the future of battery technology, especially when it comes to batteries that last longer and cycle longer, which I think actually spells bad news for swap. I think that's the reason, because swap has already failed twice before. It failed in the United States and it failed in Israel and Denmark with Better Place and with another and with Tesla here. I think because that failed, that's the reason why the structure of NEO's battery acid company was structured the way it was. I think that's the reason why CATL invested in this in the way that they did with this separately owned subsidiary. And the funding is different. The structure is different. But yeah, so I think that it's not necessarily a permanent part of their strategy. I like the way that they're building their swap stations. They're completely modular. You can assemble them in 24 to 48 hours, and they've cut it down to essentially taking up 2 parking spaces. And you can move them in a day or two. I think this is absolutely amazing. I think it's going to help bridge that psychological gap for people who have range anxiety, and it's a bridge until infrastructure is in place. I think 20 years from now, you'll be able to charge a car anywhere. We'll probably have like cordless charging somewhere. I don't know. So, yeah. So JJA says, yes, NEO shares are extremely diluted compared to XPEV. See, the branding of NEO is better than XPEV. XPEV has work to do on the branding. This is something that I've discussed a couple of times on live streams. Man, XPEV's branding sucks compared to NEO. NEO is just and I don't know about you guys, but I speak a couple of languages. XPEV is going to be very hard for a lot of non-English speakers to pronounce, and NEO is just not. It's a phrase or a sound that's easily exportable into different cultures, and I like the simplicity of the branding. I like the so XPEV's branding is a little bit extreme and I don't know how to say that. I don't know how to express that feeling. I just don't think it's going to translate as well across cultures. They need to have an absolute badass product to sell in other cultures to overcome, I think, that kind of poor branding. And I think NIO just has an advantage in terms of branding. But we have yet to see any Chinese vehicle sell really truly well outside of the United States. We really do. So in some places in Asia and in Australia, they sell some Chinese vehicles, and I think the BYD Tang is going to be sold in Norway by September, and I think it may already be selling in Australia. I think someone told me that in the comments of one of my videos, but I don't know. So let me see here. How much do you think NIO is going to be invested or slowed down by their battery swapping approach, companies like BYD or XPEV? Well, I don't necessarily think they're going to be slowed down at this point. I don't think it's really going to be a drag on their operations until a couple of years from now. But look, you're talking about a battery shortage, and another comment, a few comments down. Battery swapping actually just makes that shortage more acute, right? Because essentially, for every vehicle that you have that uses battery as a service, you actually need roughly, based on the new Type 2 stations, you need something like 1.1675 batteries or something to accommodate that, because there always needs to be one battery in there charging in the swap station, right? So some estimates that were done by some other person, some other YouTube video that I watched, is basically about 1.2 batteries really for every person signed up for battery as a service, right? So it actually makes the problem a little bit more acute to a degree. But right now, everyone is addressing the battery shortage. There are something like 167 electric vehicle battery manufacturers, lithium-ion battery manufacturers that are building facilities worldwide. Over 100 of those are just in China. And a lot of these companies are switching to that cheaper and more abundant lithium iron phosphate battery chemistry, which looks like that's going to go in all of the lower end vehicles, and anything that needs a range of, or anything that can handle using a range of under 250 miles, like BYD's electric taxi fleet all uses these lithium iron phosphate batteries, their Blade battery. In fact, their entire lineup of electric vehicles uses that. But it looks like almost all of the electric taxi fleets that are in use right now in China use that lithium iron phosphate battery chemistry. So yeah. And XPEV has a bad brand name for the West, but good model names. True. BYD has a good name for the West, but bad model names. You know what's funny is I talked to someone in Germany a long time ago who said that BYD in German just simply doesn't translate. It's a very, very clumsy set of letters put together in German. So I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think that BYD does. I think that XPEV does fine in the U.S. Or we'll call it something else, of course, XPing or whatever. And I think that BYD does fine in the U.S. But in terms of other cultures, you don't know. It was like the Chevy Nova, right? You guys all know the story of anyone who ever took a marketing class knows about the Chevy Nova. Nova in Spanish means doesn't go, and it took months for them to figure out why they couldn't sell the Chevy Nova in Mexico or anywhere in Latin America. But that's one of those apocryphal stories, or it's one of those stories, not apocryphal. It's one of those stories that it may be an urban legend, but you learn about in marketing class. But yeah. So Anonymous keeps hyping up XPEV. Look, you only have to watch my videos to know that I'm a huge fan of XPEV. But I don't know that XPEV will be way bigger than NIO. And I think they have an edge when it comes to manufacturing expertise. They definitely have an edge when it comes to owning their own manufacturing process. I saw a YouTube video the other day where they talk about NIO being vertically integrated. They are the opposite of vertically integrated. They own none of their manufacturing process. The JAC essentially owns all of that. XPEV is different. They own all of their engineering. They own all of their manufacturing. They own all of everything. They are, except battery manufacturer, they're completely, mostly vertically integrated. NIO is not. And that's not the first time I've heard NIO and vertically integrated together. They're not. NIO is really shooting to be more like the Apple of electric vehicles, where they're designers, but they don't necessarily own any of that process. And that wasn't done on purpose. That was done because they got into financial trouble and they had to take these giant rescue packages. And then now they have no trouble going back to secondary markets and raising money. Their balance sheet has been shored up quite a bit. But in terms of financial condition, they are in worse condition than XPeng is right now. They're not as vertically integrated, but they do have an edge in terms of branding and public consciousness. And this is something throughout my career as a financial advisor that I've consistently underestimated is the power of brand. I don't see the point. Well, I know people that I've talked to in China who tell me that they would buy a Neo just for the free childcare that they get at the Neo house, meaning they can drop off their kids in a Neo house and go shopping for 2 hours and come back, right? I see that as a drain on the balance sheet of Neo because I don't see how they're going to make tons of money unless they sell a t-shirt to that person every time they come in or a hat or whatever it is. Unless that part of the operation could be profitable. I don't see that it is. But I do see that it's a giant attraction for people of a certain social class who can afford to, and this is, when I say people of a certain social class, these vehicles initially were like 60 to 80,000 bucks, right? And they've come down a little bit in their price point since then. But this is, if you can afford a Neo vehicle, you are in a particular social class in China, right? You have kind of made it, and you're probably in that entrepreneur or professional class, and you want to associate with people in your same at your same economic class. That is simply a fact of life. It's something that's common across all cultures, and this gives you the opportunity to hobnob with other people that have money that can maybe further your career and help you make connections, right? Or it's called guangxi in Chinese, right? It's just not something that's unique to China. This is unique. This is any culture that has private property ends up developing this this tendency, right, of creating connections and influence based on friction between social classes, right? So I think it's a very dangerous thing to try and profit off of, though, and I hope that Neo can kind of walk that line. So what I'm really considering here is XPeng's not bare bones approach, but leaner approach appealing to a much larger market that's a little bit downstream in terms of economics. Is that approach going to work? I think it probably will work better in the future. I think that He Xiaopeng and William Li looked at what Neo did, and William Li was like, I'm going to do exactly what Neo did. I'm going to make a high-end vehicle and enter into that high-end space with a high-margin, high-cost vehicle. And it's going to give me the money that I need to move downstream and create more models and a wider product offering. He Xiaopeng looked at Tesla and said, Tesla already did all the hard work. I can target a much broader market further downstream and create vehicles that are a lot less expensive, but have a lot more opportunities to sell them. And I think that was the kind of difference in their approaches. Which one of those approaches is going to be successful? Is Neo going to be able to make that sort of mid-range vehicle that 100 million people in China can afford, right? So China's middle class now is roughly 200 million people, which is almost the size of the working population in the United States, right? More people are going to be brought into that middle class fold in China. That market is only going to grow in the future, right? So yeah, I'm very optimistic for the future of both companies, but because of the nature of destructive competition in China, I don't see either one of them having greater than 10% market share in the future. I really don't. So, Mido's 27 says, you know anything about BYD's self-driving AI technology efforts? Yeah, I know that they're buying a lot of that technology. They're not developing it in-house, and they're trying to acquire companies out there to bring them under their umbrella. They are investing, when I say they're investing money in research and development, it looks like they're going out and acquiring companies. And that actually may be one of the motivations for spinning off BYD Semiconductor and things like that, is to have the cash to invest in research and development. And research and development for them, in this case, probably means acquisition. And they have plenty of opportunities to acquire. China right now, and it has been for the last 10 years, is an extremely innovative place when it comes to software. And they have lots of people to partner with. They can partner with any one of the large firms, like Tencent out there is deeply involved in AI. Baidu is deeply involved in AI. There are a number of other companies out there that are just very deeply involved in AI. So they have plenty of opportunities to partner out there. Adam says, hey, Jason, the man who never stops working. Adam, I got to be honest with you. I barely work at all. You think this is work for me? This is not work for me, man. This is me talking about things that I'm interested in researching anyway. And as soon as I'm done, I'm going to go walk along the beach here at my dad's house, and then I'll probably come back and read a few more articles and have a few more beers. Anyway, so JJA says, I've spoken to a few friends in China. Many of them do not know XPeng, but they are aware of NIO in China. Many of them are super into branding. I am long XPeng as a disclaimer. Yeah, that's so like I said, I don't know where your friends are in China, but if they're in southern China, they definitely know who XPeng is. If they're in northern China or Shanghai area, they might not know who XPeng is. It is true though that NIO's branding is quite a bit better. They got early support from a regional government there, which probably meant that support trickled down from a more centralized authority like the Chinese Communist Party, and then they pressured a local government into helping them out, and it was probably a matter of national pride to a degree. Yeah, but no, I think that's actually true. All right, folks. So I have been on here for about an hour and a half. I have actual work that I do need to do today, and I'm going to go ahead and get off here in just a second. But I want to thank you guys for showing up. I'm going to be doing some more live streams this week just because it's a little bit more difficult for me to actually make videos on my laptop here, and I'm kind of on vacation. But anyway, I wanted to thank you very much for tuning in. Super chat features are on, guys. Yeah, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much.